There are many contenders for what can be considered the greatest war movie of all time. For some, it's Saving Private Ryan, for others, it's Full Metal Jacket, and still others might say the Best Picture winning Platoon. But no matter what one's personal preference is, it's pretty much agreed that there is one war movie that stands head and shoulders above the rest, with that being the legendary Apocalypse Now. Considered not only one of the best war movies of all time, but one of the greatest movies ever made, period. Apocalypse Now manages to capture the sheer insanity and horrors of war in ways that no other movie has ever really been able to duplicate, which is only appropriate seeing as how the disastrous production surrounding it was almost as bad as the chaos depicted in the movie itself. And today, I'd like to briefly go over the mastery of this movie and why it's considered by so many to be one of, if not the, greatest war movie ever made. And there are going to be major spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen the movie yet but plan to, you should probably come back to this video after you have seen it. This will be your one and only warning. Okay, so to make one thing immediately clear, I'm not a film expert. I could never go over all of the different film techniques this movie uses that makes it so brilliant, or even give a huge, in-depth analysis as to how the story is written. Instead, I'm just giving a brief overview of the movie based off my amateur experiences writing books and as a film lover. So if you're looking for a more in-depth analysis, this might not be the video for you. But that being said, Apocalypse Now is a modern retelling of Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness, and they both tell more or less the same basic story. A man is sent on a dangerous mission down a river to find a rogue and once respected man who's gone completely insane. And both works also explore the horrors of what humanity is truly capable of and what it does to people like Curts, who can't stand what they have to witness and eventually give in to total madness as a result. Now, while Heart of Darkness is a masterful story in its own right, one of the most remarkable aspects of Apocalypse Now is how easily it translates the story from the African Congo to the Vietnam War. Because, simply put, the movie's title would have you believe the movie is about the world coming to an end. And by the time it's over, that's exactly how it feels, even if the audience knows how things actually go down. Because the thing is, Apocalypse Now isn't about the political war of strategy that the generals and higher up politicians are playing. It's about the psychological effects the war has on the people who actually have to fight in it. And this is perhaps best illustrated in the character of Captain Willard. He's a broken man in pretty much every sense of the word. He doesn't know how to be anything anymore except a soldier, and while he hates both what he witnesses and what he has to do, he goes along with it anyway because he feels there's nothing else he can do. In other words, he's a textbook definition of a man who's lost his identity to war and has no idea what to do with himself other than keep engaging in the very thing that's destroying him. But despite that, it's made very clear many times throughout the movie that he's far from seen it all, as his reaction to the many things he has to do and witness very much prove. And really, one of the only good things about the French plantation scene is when the woman who's been staring at Willard the whole time takes a moment to comment on his true nature. because she sees him for who he truly is, probably even better than Curts himself. And speaking of Curts, Willard's broken nature is what makes him perfect for the assignment of killing him, since it makes him immune to Curt's ability to completely break people. Because, to put it simply, Curts specializes in taking ordinary people and driving them to insanity by making them believe he has all the answers and his way is right. But the thing about Willard is, he's broken, but completely sane. And it's that very brokenness that protects him from Curt's mind games. It allows him to see past the delusions of grandeur Curts builds himself up as having, to see that he's nothing but a completely mad, lost person who desperately wants an escape from both what he's become and what he's had to witness that drove him over the edge in the first place. And Willard's broken nature envelops everything around the film, lending it its feeling of both horror and insanity that no other movie has really been able to capture. To put it another way, the movie was said to have been written while the screenwriters listened to songs written and sung by The Doors, and specifically the song that plays over the opening while Willard is having his meltdown, The End. And let's just say, it shows in the final product. Because that song tells a tale of insanity from people who've had to witness things no person should have to, and are totally giving up as they succumb to both madness and the fact that their time is up. And if there was anything to describe the horror and hopelessness of war, that would be it in a nutshell. And it's the fact that the movie is able to capture all those feelings so well that many veterans who survived the Vietnam War have actually said that this movie, Apocalypse Now, is the most accurate representation of it they've ever seen. Because there's no glory to be had, nothing valuable for the soldiers to learn, just complete and total terror, tragedy, and madness at every turn, with no hope of ever truly escaping it. But other than Willard, the other character that completely envelops the movie would be Colonel Curts, as should be obvious. And what's particularly notable about him is, the entire movie he's hyped up as being this almost otherworldly presence that Willard has no idea what to think of, to the point that pretty much everybody would say that he'd never be able to live up to what he's made out to be. And yet, he most definitely does. Somehow, even with all of the build-up beforehand, Colonel Curts manages to completely live up to the legend and be even more than the movie made him out to be. Now, a lot of this has to do with the performance of Marlon Brando, as many have argued that his work as Curts is some of his best ever, and it's not undeserved praise either. The way Brando is able to convey Curt's total insanity, pseudo-wisdom, and sheer brokenness of his war experiences is on a level most actors could never even hope to achieve. Because, simply put, when you look at this man, you know he's lost his mind and has succumbed to the dark insanity inside him. You can see that just by looking in his eyes. That's how good Brando really is at selling Curt's character. But other than Brando's phenomenal acting, there's also the way he's written. Because Curts isn't a man who just snapped for no reason. He was slowly driven over the edge by having to witness so many atrocities and experience way too many horrors he wasn't prepared for, and his mind just could not take it anymore. As he himself even explains in his monologue about the inoculated children, he describes a feeling similar to a diamond bullet entering his head, and then coming to admire the Vietnamese for what they had done. Because it was that, and similar incidents, that made him start to believe that the perfect soldier is one that is willing to do anything in order to achieve victory, no matter how horrible or depraved it is. But in his insanity, he stopped actually fighting the war and instead created a cult based off his beliefs, doing anything his broken mind believed was necessary. And as Willard puts it, there isn't any method to it at all, and only makes sense in the Colonel's completely shattered head. To put it simply, Curts was once a good soldier and a man of wisdom, but being exposed to the inhumane realities of war made him succumb not only to insanity, but the evil that lurks in every person's heart. And the result is a completely destroyed man that's a slave to both the whims of his madness and the horrors that drove him to it, with his only hope of escape being the sweet release of death. Willard even says he believed Curts secretly wanted him to kill him, but also wanted to go out fighting like a soldier. And even when he finally does die, the way he says his iconic, "the horror," isn't nearly as dramatic as most would believe, as he sounds so shell-shocked there's barely any emotion in it at all. And really, both that line and the way he delivers it betray just how broken he really was by the war. To put it another way, Colonel Curts is considered one of the best villains ever put on film for a reason, and it's for both everything I've said and plenty of other things I didn't go over as well. The way both the writing and Marlon Brando convey his tortured nature, but also his dangerous insanity, is one without parallel, and a person that very much lives up to everything the movie had made him out to be. Because in the end, we all have a little bit of Curts inside ourselves. We all have the ability to become just like him if we succumb to the madness and darkness within ourselves. So it's almost like finally meeting and confronting him is confronting the insanity inside all of us. And it's something that's extremely hard to forget once witnessed with your own eyes. Once again, it's really no wonder why this movie is considered one of the best movies ever made, as its depiction of everything, from Willard to the war to Colonel Curts, is so spot on it makes one feel as if they've lived through it themselves by the time it's all over. And yet, through all that horror, insanity, and depravity, there's still a haunting beauty in the way it's all presented. It almost goes back to George Miller's philosophy that humans try to find beauty in everything, no matter how bad their situation is. And this is perhaps best reflected in the visual style of the movie itself. It's glorious to look at, but not entirely real either. And as the movie goes on, as they get closer to Curts, that visual style becomes more and more zany and unreal, with brown, blues, and sickly yellows appearing where they shouldn't, making it look as if the whole world is warping and succumbing to the depravity and insanity around them. There's this term known as surreal horror, which describes a type of horror that bases its scares off of things that make no sense and can't be rationalized in any logical way. And though Apocalypse Now is completely grounded in reality, the way the movie presents itself both visually and narratively, makes very effective use of that. Because the very real fear the characters face, which is the insanity and evil inside themselves, is an abstract concept and something that can't be articulated in visual terms. So the movie's attempts to do it lend to that idea that it's being told from the perspective of the soldiers. And as they start to lose their minds, the world starts to fall into the same abstract reality, reflecting how things no longer look the same to them. And this is also true in the representation of the jungle as some powerful entity, almost as if it's some kind of evil abomination instead of just a place full of trees that make good cover for the enemy and wild animals. Willard even claims that the jungle is who Curts really takes his orders from, further showing how the soldiers view it as the source of their own insanity, and maybe even some kind of physical manifestation of it, that they're in a constant battle to keep from being consumed by, which is a fight that Curts ultimately lost. To put it all into slightly simpler terms, Apocalypse Now is a masterpiece in humanity's exploration and war with both insanity and the evil we and our fellow men do. And this is reflected in absolutely every narrative decision and even frame in it. And its creative use of surreal horror to make it almost feel as if the characters are in on something much bigger and terrifying than taking out a rogue colonel is put to better use than most horror movies have ever been able to achieve with it. And in the end, the results are not only a movie about the dangers and unfortunate truths of mankind, but also one that shows the sheer hell soldiers of any war have to go through, and that in the end, most either end up like Willard, completely broken with only the most basic grasp of what it means to be a human being left, Curts, succumbing to complete and total madness after being unable to cope with unimaginable horrors, or dead, with nobody making it out completely unscathed. And its ability to portray all of that in a way that anybody can understand definitely made the final product a masterpiece worth the almost equally torturous experience of having to make it. Alright, I think I'm going to end it there. So now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that Apocalypse Now simply has no equal when it comes to depicting the absolute horrors, insanity, and tragedy of war? Or do you believe I've got it all wrong? Please let me know in the comments below. And like I always say, you do not have to agree with anything I said in this video if you don't want to. You are entitled to your own opinion, and if you think that everything I said was completely backwards, that's absolutely fine. And thank you all for watching. It's very appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.